Hi, and welcome to Women in Sports. My name is Alexandra Allred. I am an adjunct professor with Tarleton State University at the Department of Kinesiology. And this is my book, When Women Stood, but this is for a course. So if you're just dropping in to just check this out, welcome. Otherwise, for my students, we are on chapter 2. This is the third segment of the series, and this is the media image of women of enlightenment. So welcome. I kind of touched on it in the previous segments, but what is the hegemonic feminine ideal? I'll let you check out the actual slide and read it, but basically what it came down to is, what is a woman supposed to look like? How is she supposed to behave? How is she supposed to dress according to her cultural and social norms? So moving through time with the fall of the Roman Empire, we move into, the 16th century is considered the Age of Enlightenment, which was a particularly tough time to be a female. The Roman Catholic Church was the strongest church in the most powerful church in Western Europe. And the language in the literature that we see really changed for women in particular. And her portrayal in Holy Scriptures had also taken a pretty big change. She was now corrupt and you couldn't trust her. She was lustful and a whore. Then at the same time, she had to be chaste and virginal. And one of the more important things is she had to be this submissive, white, frail female. And of course, so many people have argued, how could somebody possibly live during those times when they're doing hard labor on so many things and be so frail and submissive? But again, the writing and the media went to the select few, the elite. And we're going to see this again and again throughout the series, is how often it's that we're really only talking to a small population, but everybody is still under the same umbrella, which kind of makes it tough. So the big question before we even go on is the hegemonic feminine ideal. And that's, in this case, in the Age of Enlightenment, that's this frail, submissive white woman who's of elite status. But what does it mean for everybody? And basically, I'll let you look at the slide, but what it is how the woman looks, how she dresses, how she behaves. It has a direct reflection upon her own community, the patriarchal males in her vicinity, her husband, her father, her church. So this is kind of tough. But so we got to understand, what is the meaning of the masculinity? And for men, it meant being strong and empowered and owning land or being a warrior. And so it's important to understand that over time, we don't talk about this enough either, is that this became really difficult for males too, because if they were compassionate, if they were sympathetic or empathetic, then they were considered somehow less masculine, or they were considered weak. And so when we talk about what these ideals are assigned to male and female, it's been really difficult for both. And we're seeing that more and more with our boys as we're opening up and talking about it. But in the 16th century, specific to women and eventually women in sports, there was really two kind of females. There was the essential female and the non-essential female. And this is so ironic, and this is so women's sports history, that the essential woman was really who we would consider non-essential. But the essential woman, she was essential to her church. She was essential to patriarchal communities, to her father and to her leaders and to her community. She was the one who was submissive and frail and chaste and proper and dressed as such and behaved as such. The non-essential female was the one who was out there tilling the fields and working in the factories and doing everything she could, and literally hard labor. And we found that in the 16th and 17th century record books by the church, there's literally a blank space where they don't even put in her name or what she did, or her name might be there, but then her occupation was not noted, because the church didn't want to have to recognize that this non-essential human being was out there working side by side in the fields, in the factories, in merchants, in the streets with the men, but we were calling her non-essential. And so she just was erased. And so this is kind of important to understand because this happened again and again. So historically, how we see women is always been through media or literature, right? And every now and then, like Kaniska, the daughter of the king, we talked about in a previous segment, it was once again a woman who shocked everyone, and this time the media was quite favorable. Her name was Elizabeth Wilkinson, and after her husband was found guilty of murder and rape and burglary, he was charming, she challenged a woman who had testified against her husband to a full-out brawl and took out an ad in the newspaper in London. And it starts with, "I, Elizabeth Wilkinson," and then goes on to say, "Want to meet you and throw down, meet me at noon at such and such place." And the woman shows up, as does hundreds of witnesses who want to see this. And she proceeds to just beat the absolute you-know-what out of this woman, and then realizes, okay, I got a pretty good gig going on here, and fought hundreds of people during her career. We know that she was born early in the 1700s, don't really know when, there was no coverage of when she died, but she became so popular in the newspaper for her known trash talking. She would take out ads and post and have them in the newspaper, and people would read them with delight over who she challenged, and she didn't care. It could be bare knuckles, it could be weapons, it could be men, it could be women, and she won every single fight and could not be beaten, and she was absolutely a folk hero during that time. And of course she defied every norm that there should be for female behavior. And it was about this time that female rowers and sailors and climbers actually started doing things as well. What makes Elizabeth different is that she was lowbrow, she was low class, right? But everyone just loved what she was doing so much, and literally hundreds of people would show up for these matches, and she would have them anytime, anywhere, and just throw down. She was the exception, but otherwise, the other women who were allowed to engage in these activities or kind of lighthearted races, they were all of elite status. And this was kind of the way it always was. A little fun fact, though, is the great-great-granddaughter of Genghis Khan was quite the wrestler as well. And the same thing, she fought and lost to no one. And during this time, I'll let you take a look at the slide, but during this time, her uncle finally had enough, and he wanted her to be married. And she finally said to both her uncle and her father, "Well, I'll get married to the guy that can beat me in wrestling." She was a known military strategist, a great warrior, greatly respected, but also, as you see, the deal is that if you win, then I'll marry you, but if you lose, then you owe me 100 horses. And by the end of her wrestling career, I should say, she won over 10,000 horses. So again, as you dig into history, you find these great stories of female athletes. And even though we have someone like this, the reality is, that she wasn't the only female wrestler. And Elizabeth wasn't the only boxer. But these women finally come out, and we get to see who and what they are and what they could do. But at the same time, these same women were combating the hysteria notion that goes all the way back to Aristotle, which said that women had these floating ovaries and her womb floated, and so because of that, she was out of her mind and she was hysterical, and so this is why she couldn't have legal status equal to men, because obviously she wasn't, right? And so what I want you all to take a look at is some of the things that she actually had to endure, one of them being the corset. And I have an image up there that was found in London, and you can see how the rib cage is rounded out as over time of wearing these corset, or tight lacing it's called. It deformed them, and are we surprised that so many women passed out, so many women died at a very early age, that so many women suffered from deformities because of what we were doing to them? Not only that, there was the foot binding. I know this is trigger alert, this is upsetting, but what they did is at age 3, they would literally, about 3 years old, they would literally break the little girl's foot in half. And then from there, wrap it in wet towels and just wrap and wrap and wrap it. So finally you can see in the images how the toes are literally folded over. And the biggest image to the right, you can see where the foot was broken and the heel actually meets some of the toes. And they roll it over so that and the ideal image of this woman with this foot is a 3-inch foot. Well, of course, she couldn't walk. And so this, in China and in Japan, this fit nicely with only an elite family would be able to have a crippled woman, right? Because it would just show that they had staff, they had slaves, they had servants who would care for them while she just sat on her chair. And I don't know, what a miserable life, right? This went on, it was fine. It was not banned until 1912, but we know that these procedures continued even into the 1950s. And so there was this idea of what women could and couldn't do. And then came the bicycle. And women were always challenging clothes anyway. Amelia Bloomer, in the mid-1800s, decided that the skirt was ridiculous. And so Amelia Bloomers, she kind of designed her own. Imagine a skirt cut in half and then sewn together so that you've got the billowy pant legs. And this is what her bloomers look like. And she walked the streets of London in her bloomers. And so, of course, many were horrified, but many more just sort of laughed about it because it wasn't going to take on, right? But it started to become more popular. And as it became popular, by the later 1800s, women took to bicycles. And you would have thought that civilization as they knew it was going to stop. So they found it utterly offensive that women would straddle a bike, that she would have her legs apart, that she would be in pants. And many at first still wore their dresses because they understood how catastrophic this could be socially to be wearing pants. But after many dangerous and pretty bad crashes, a lot of them decided that they were going to go to the split skirt. Lady Haberton created the split skirt, and I got an image there so you can kind of see same thing is it's still decent. And as she always maintained, it was important to be proper and ladylike, and all the sleeves all the way down to the wrists. They still wore their hats. It was up to the neck, but at least she could straddle the bicycle. The other thing that you need to know is that dresses prior to that time, and I have 14 pounds, but they really could weigh up to 20 pounds, the dress. And again, this goes back to the hysteria slide is, women were wearing an extra 20 pounds on them at all times, no matter the time of year. And so, of course, people were passing out because of that, along with the corset. But with the bikes, a lot of the women then also started getting rid of the corset. And this was just shocking. And so, again, using the media, prominent physicians created the term bicycle face, and they call this a true medical condition. And they warned women that if they were on the bicycle and they were grimacing and they were concentrating, their face would get in a certain way and it would stick that way. When you were little, you heard if you crossed your eyes, they would stay crossed. Well, they were telling women that they were going to have bicycle face if they continued cycling. And I'll let you look at some of the just some of the quotes, but it's pretty incredible how strongly people felt about women being on a bicycle. And this really was the end of social norms as we knew it. And then from about that same time, Madge Sayers became one of the first known, recognized ice skaters, and she was the first champion that we know of. And this was a big deal because, like we've seen before, like with Kaniska, the daughter of a king, here comes this upper class woman and wealthy, and that's how it had to be. But she saw in the rule books that there was no specific rule of saying that a woman couldn't enter, and so she did. And the records indicate that everyone, including the judges, later agreed that she had won, but they simply could not let her have the gold medal, and so they gave her the silver. But this was the beginning of then changing clothing again, because the judges came back and they banned women from ice skating, saying, well, it's too dangerous, plus the judges can't see your feet. And so then came the push to bring up the skirt length over time. These are the kind of things I'm sorry, we'll go back, but let you look at that. But these are the kind of things that we see that media is the friend and enemy of women in sports.